session in our aviation expert series. Today, I have Jay Shabat joining us from Airline Weekly, and Skip, he will talk about that in a minute. But I just wanted to really reach out and take this opportunity, number one, to congratulate all of you for all the hard work that you've done in your terms one, two, and three. And as you embark into your final stage for this year and also your extended research, it is important that you now employ critical thinking and try to go out of your comfort zone and dig deeper about the practicalities of the globalized nature of aviation industry, but also looking into the resilience, the crisis management, the management, the leadership, and all of that that we have been speaking during our modules with our guest lecturers, with our associate lecturers. And today I have a great guest in Jay. And Jay has been very kind in allocating his time. I will let him do the introduction. So Jay, welcome. Why don't you start with the introduction and we'll take it from there. So welcome to our aviation expert series. And please do the introduction, please.
Yeah, thanks so much, Naveed, and thanks to all of you who are listening to this, watching this. I appreciate your time. This is always fun for me to talk airlines. I always like to say nobody has to twist my arm to spend an hour talking about airlines. So very happy to do this. And I'll also leave my contact information at the end. You guys are all welcome to contact me, follow me on LinkedIn. Address anything that you may find unclear that I say, or just want to follow up or discuss anything. I'm always happy to do that. My first slide here is just an introduction of myself. My colleague, you'll see his handsome face over there, Mr. Gordon Smith. We work together on a newsletter called Airline Weekly. Airline Weekly is, now Gordon's been with us maybe a little over a year. Has it been even 2 years? I'm not sure. I've been doing this for more than 20 years. So I don't know how old you guys are listening, but some of you may have not even been born yet when I started Airline Weekly. So it makes me feel very old, but also wise, right, Naveed?
Absolutely. I mean, we do have some professional students as well, Jay. So
yeah,
this is all
okay,
good.
good. So you guys are a little bit older. Okay, good. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you guys were mix of undergraduates or whatever, but good to know that we have some people closer to my age. Don't make me feel as old. So that's a little bit in the way of introduction. My company just put some information about Airline Weekly here. Some of you, I'm sure, are going to be running airlines one day, probably running the world someday. So when you guys are all rich and famous and powerful, you can subscribe to Airline Weekly. But now let's get into the meat of the presentation. And I'm going to start with a question for all of you. It's a question that if you do become, if you are running airlines one day or running departments of airlines, this is the question that's going to be on your mind when you wake up every morning. What is the price of oil? Because, and I'm really talking about jet fuel here. Jet fuel, though, is a little bit hard to get an exact price. It does vary by region, and we'll keep it simple and call it oil, which is pretty close. And of course, jet fuel is refined from oil. So, what is the price of oil? Jet fuel is the #1 expense item for most airlines. There's a few where labor might be #1, but in general, airlines pay more for fuel than they do for anything else, including their people. That's true at most airlines. So what's the price? I was looking this morning, and before I tell you, some of you may know, but here is a graph of what the price has kind of trended, how it's trended over the course of the past really decade and a half. I started in 2000, and don't get too caught up on, there is, so you see in 2000, I said, oil costs $30 a barrel on average. There is, $30 back then is a little bit different than $30 today because we have inflation, but don't get caught up on that. In general, the inflation is not going to affect these numbers too much. what's important here is that you can see in that sort of first decade of the 2000s, you saw that rapid run up in 2000s, $30. And then it goes, in 2003, a little bit higher, 2004 higher, 2005 higher, until you get to 2008, where airlines are having to pay $100 per barrel for their oil. And this, by the way, is WTI. There's different benchmarks, but it's all basically the same trend. Then in 2009, you had a big crash in the oil price, which maybe your reaction is, oh, airlines must have loved that. But actually, they didn't, because the reason that oil prices crashed that year was there was a big global economic crisis and demand for oil dropped. So that's not kind of a fun reason for oil prices to drop. Oil actually bounced back very quickly after that global crisis. You can see there, 2011 to 2014, you had 4 straight years of very, very high oil prices for airlines. Those are difficult years because the global economy was recovering from that big, housing crisis in the US, that global financial crisis, but oil prices were really hampering the recovery. But then what you had, it started in late 2014, you had a huge crash. And you see there in 2015, oil $49 a barrel, it goes down to 43. 2015 and 2016, even 2017, were some of the best years ever for the global airline industry. I'm going to show you a chart on that in a minute. But if you ever wonder why, if you ever see a chart of profitability by year, and you say, wow, airlines did relatively well in 15, 16, 17, that's a large part of your answer, is the oil prices went down a lot. Now you can see, I'm going to fast forward here to 2022, we had a spike, 95. That had a lot to do with the Russia-Ukraine war. There were some other factors that kind of drove up the price that year, but the price then came down in 23 and 24. By the end of 2024, airlines were paying, something in the range of, 70-ish, even into the 60s. And I'll make a general statement here. When oil prices are, let's call it, below $80 now, that's a pretty comfortable place. Speaking very generally here, airlines can deal with that. Once it starts getting over 80, you get a little bit uncomfortable. And then once you start getting below 60, then it's like, okay, wow, we're having a good time here. So now let's go to 2025, and I did it by month. So in January, the price started out at 76, went down to 72 in February, 68 in March, getting a little better. And I just pulled this for April 28th, that was Friday. We're down to $62 a barrel. So it's getting to be a very favorable situation for the airlines on the oil front. So that's good news. Remember that as we go to the next slide, because at the same time, demand has been pretty good. Now, we're going to talk about, and by the way, I should say, Naveed, if you ever want to jump in here with any questions, just
sure.
Off. Yeah, anytime. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking here.
No. You're doing a great job. So let me listen in.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was going to say is that demand has been pretty good. We're going to get to like the very current, here we are in almost May of 2025. We'll talk about that in a minute, but really through 2024 and even the start of 2025, demand has been like in a pretty good place. Premium demand has been very, very strong. And I'm speaking globally here. You could always find, this market here, that market here, where there's an exception. But whether or not you're in London or Tokyo or Sydney, Australia, or New York or Sao Paulo or wherever it is, premium demand, Dubai, premium demand has been pretty strong. And same thing for just the long haul, like intercontinental journeys, pretty strong. Tourism around the world has been strong, very robust recovery from what happened during the COVID crisis in 2020 and 2021 and into 2022. And then even on the business demand side, it kind of varies by market. It varies by different kinds of business, but it's been okay. I mean, there's been a lot of recovery since COVID for the business side. So, so far so good. And now let's go. We talked about demand. So now let's talk about supply, the supply of airline seats. Well, that's been greatly constrained. And some of you are maybe familiar with this, but there's this big global aircraft shortage right now. And it has to do with Boeing and Airbus just unable to produce as much as they wanted to for various supply chain problems. Labor shortages have been an issue.
Mm.
Engines have been a big problem. When I'm talking about MRO, some of you guys may know because you're in aviation, but I always like to explain that that's just maintenance and repair. So, fixing, working on the aircraft. There's been a lot of uh, shortages in capacity. If you want to get your plane, uh, you know, every few years, every few over a certain period, you have to send your plane to the shop to do upgrades and inspections, things like that. Well, sometimes you're going to face a lot of delays because of this tight capacity. So we've got relatively cheap oil. We've got pretty strong demand. We've got very constricted supply. And I just, before I jump into my next slide, I did put some details. This is from a company called AirCap. They
Mm.
are the largest aircraft lessor in the world. So when I say aircraft lessor, they just rent planes to airlines and just keep it as simple as possible. And you can see here, OEMs are just talking about really Boeing and Airbus and the engine makers. But 3,000 aircraft behind production schedules
Wow.
they expect in 20. So way, way behind. So, and
Mm.
then, some other reasons, engine reliability, and some of them I already talked about, the MRO capacity. Here's just another chart. You can look at this on your own, but it just shows, narrow bodies and wide bodies where the shortages are. But what I started to say before is that we have a situation of cheap oil. We have a situation of pretty strong demand. We have a situation of very constrained supply. So sounds to me like airline heaven. I don't know if that's the right way to characterize it, but it almost seems like things are too perfect.
Mm.
And well, is that true? In a way, kind of, because if you look at this chart here, this is the one I referred to before. This is IATA, so industry profits per year. And you can see, by the way, you can see that 2015, 2016 jump that I talked about earlier. And then you can see 2020 and 2021, that was COVID. But look at 23 and 24, some of the best years ever for the global airline industry. So everything I just said is really having a positive impact, or did in 23 and 24 anyway. So it really is true. Now, I don't want to paint this out to be, some kind of state of utopia or anything. I did. I should just remind everybody that the airline business is an extremely difficult business,
Yeah.
and even when the airline industry is producing record margins, they're still really not that great. I also, by the way, write and cover railroad industry in North America, and just to give you a sense, in the airline business, if you earn a 10% operating profit margin, time to throw a party.
Mm.
In the railroad industry, it's your margins are more like 40%, sometimes
Wow.
50%. So
Yeah.
yeah, don't get, don't before you throw the party streamers and
Yeah.
call your
Yeah.
friends over, and just remember that. But still, I mean, that's good that we're having a period of relative strength. There also, I should really mention that non-fuel costs have really spiked
Mm.
since COVID, really, before COVID, labor, aircraft, airports. And that has really affected some airlines more than others, especially the airlines that are not exposed to some
Yeah.
of those areas of strength that I mentioned earlier, the premium, the intercontinental. So in the United States, for example, the low cost carriers have really, really struggled. Southwest, Spirit went bankrupt, JetBlue is losing money.
Mm.
Um, so again, when I'm saying that the airline industry is doing very well, it's on a global basis. It doesn't mean that there aren't
It's a matter
exceptions.
of perspective, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's perspective, and it's also by market. It's by airlines. There's always going to be some variance. So
Jay, just one question. When we say non-fuel costs have spiked, um, in your views, what are the main drivers for it? Is it again regionalized and localized, or generally speaking, they have gone up because everywhere are there are micro and the macro level of economics at play here?
Yeah. So I think some of it is macro. I think the world has faced a lot of overall general inflation, cost
Mm,
inflation over the past 5 years. Some of that has to do with, higher commodity prices. I think labor markets have been very tight and around the
mm,
world. Some of that, I mean, I can speak more fluently about it in the US, where we've had some immigration restrictions more recently. We've had, also, during COVID, a lot of people exited the workforce, some of
yes.
them because they got sick or, they just couldn't work. Some of them because they retired early. They said, okay, some of them because, well, the stock market in the US went up a lot and some people were able to retire a little bit earlier. So
Mm,
I think that was one reason. Materials costs went up a lot. Some of that had to do with the global trading system. Well, we can't get parts from Russia anymore because there's
mm,
sanctions on Russia. So now our aircraft is going to be a little expensive. So it's like a combination of a lot of different reasons for that. With airport costs, a lot of airports have invested in new terminals, invested in new runways, new lounges, things like that. So that comes with a cost, and that cost has been passed on to airlines in many cases. So
mm.
yeah,
Great.
a lot of reasons for inflation.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, yeah, and there definitely are markets that have struggled. I mean, I can name a few, like the China's long haul international market has been rough, and the inbound to Hawaii from Japan. I mean, I'm just kind of naming random ones here, but you can definitely find exceptions to all the good news out there. But uh, it's mostly been a pretty good picture for especially the world's largest airlines. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of move into a little bit more of the here and now. What's happening right now? So I mentioned that just in the past couple of weeks and months, fuel prices have dropped, but remember that what I said in 2008, that fuel prices dropped, but it was for a not very happy reason.
Mm,
It was a giant global recession. Well, I think there's a fear that the same thing could be happening now. That the
mm,
reason why oil prices are going down is because companies are using less oil because they're investing less. I mean, I just saw yesterday that shipping, like maritime shipping between China and the U.S. is way down because of this big tariff war.
of
And
course.
yeah, and that's something. I mean, that's like a whole big topic in itself, tariff war.
Yeah.
But it's but it's these U.S. tariffs, these extreme tariffs. I mean, like really nothing to the level we've ever seen before. That is definitely having an impact on the economy. We don't know exactly what the impact is going to be,
Yeah.
but we know that we that the economy is weakening. We know that there's just extreme uncertainty. One of the
Mm,
things that I do for my job is that I listen to company earnings calls, and I
mm,
encourage you to do this. All of you guys to do this as well. Um,
absolutely.
it's a really good window on kind of how companies are thinking about the economy. So, and I'm not just talking about airlines. I mean, I always listen to every airline earnings call, but listen to JP Morgan Bank, or listen to some big manufacturing company, or Google, or Apple, Amazon, these big companies, just to kind of hear what they're thinking. So I do a lot of that, and I can tell you that the sentiment is one of very, very high uncertainty about
Mm,
what's going to happen. And it's not just the fact that the U.S. has embarked on this very risky tariff war, very costly
y-
tariff war, but also because the policies are almost changing by the day. It's like
yeah.
1 minute it's this policy, the next minute it's this policy. So companies just don't know what to do. In fact, one of the most important companies I think to watch if you really want to understand the US economy is Walmart,
Mm,
especially right now, because Walmart is America's biggest company by revenues. It's its biggest employer in the private sector. It's also its biggest importer.
yeah.
So a lot of, if you go to Walmart in the U.S., a lot of what you see on the shelves are going to be built in Asia and China, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mm,
that's very interesting. They haven't reported their earnings yet, but that's going to come up in a couple of weeks. So you can take a look at that. You might find that interesting.
Just before we move on to the next slide,
Yeah.
Jay, I just wanted to go back to that point about the economy and the micro and the macro level aspect of it. There has been a lot of leadership in the past from America when it comes to social policies, when it comes to environmental policy, DEI initiatives, and all the rest of it. Now, all of that has been in some kind of regression where there has been a huge discussions around, well, do you know what? To borrow the slogan from President of the United States currently, drill baby drill, and they talk about the fuel and the fossil fuel. Ultimately, when we talk about these fuel prices, when we talk about non-fossil fuel, for example, sustainable environment, sustainable fuels of solar, hydrogen, electric, a lot of organizations and the companies have decided to either scale back or completely put it on the shelf, their approaches to that. Same way when it comes to recruitment, you talked about labor shortages. Some of those DEI initiatives have been either cascaded down or there has been a lot of negative connotation attached to it, where a lot of people are now scaling back to it. Do you see that having any kind of impact on a micro level?
Yeah, so a lot of controversial policy changes, as you know, as we all know in the U.S. and there people are going to have different opinions on their impact. I'll just
Mm,
speak specifically about one that you brought up that's very relevant to the airline business, and that's the sustainable fuels.
mm,
Uh, so just for a little bit of background, so airlines are often cited as kind of being one of the leading offenders of climate change because
mm.
they unfairly or fairly, but because they do. Honestly, I talk about oil all the time. Oil is because it's like I said, it's the biggest cost for airlines.
Mm.
Oil is what do we use oil for? It's mostly transportation, and oil is a big reason why the big cause of climate change. There's no doubt burning fossil fuels. With coal, you could throw coal in there also, but coal is kind of diminishing. Is
Mm.
we going off on a tangent here, but just from my railroad area, we use coal for two things basically. We use it for making energy, electricity, and we use
Mm.
it for making steel.
Mm.
So, but that's coal. Oil is much bigger market, and the chief use, I think, is like 2/3 of all oil is used for transportation.
Mm.
So, when you think about transportation, what is this? Well, on cars and trucks, on the highways, some of that is transitioning to electric vehicles, but you can't, especially in China, by the way, is they're becoming a
Yeah.
leader in this. Now, in the airline space, you just can't run an electric plane unless it's tiny. And my
Mm.
dad's an engineer, and he explains this to me that to run an airplane between New York and London or New York and Tokyo, you would just have to have a battery so large and so heavy that it just doesn't. You couldn't do it.
The economics
Maybe
won't work. Mm.
yeah, the science doesn't work. Maybe
Mm.
one day someone will invent something that does. So the way they've gotten around this, the airlines, they all recognize that we have to do something, even
Yeah.
though there's limits to what we could do because we can't run electric. There's no alternatives to jet fuel except for this idea of sustainable jet fuel. That
Mm.
maybe if we can produce the jet fuel that doesn't pollute as much, instead of producing it from crude oil, maybe we can produce it from biomass or corn or whatever. I don't know,
Mm.
whatever the feedstocks are. So they've done this, but there's two major problems with this. One, and I shouldn't say problems. I should. The better word is challenges
Yeah.
that they're working on. Yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
bit of a subtle difference, but it's challenges that maybe can be overcome in time. One of the challenges is simply price. It's just so much more expensive than jet fuel. So, if we switched over, even if we could switch over to sustainable fuel 100% tomorrow, everybody would be paying, so much more for their airline tickets. That would really, contract the economy. There would be a lot more unemployment. There would a lot be suffering. So price is still a problem. The
Mm.
other problem is just scale. We don't have enough of it. There's right now, airlines are lucky if 2%, 3%, maybe 5. I don't know if any of them are doing 4 or 5% of their fuel is sustainable right now. We call it SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. So those are your two problems. Now, over the past couple of years, particularly in the past U.S. administration, there was a big program to subsidize aviation fuels to try to encourage more production, to try to build scale. With scale, you can lower cost. That's the kind of thing that's potentially at risk now with the new administration. We don't really know. I don't think there's been any executive order, any laws yet that have reversed some of those prior policies on supporting sustainable aviation, but that could come. It's like a big question mark. So airlines are kind of wondering now, well, are we pledged to do this, have 20% by X date, and is that really achievable? What if the policy is reversed? So there's a whole lot of, uncertain. Again, I use this word uncertainty. This is the most, other than the word tariff, the most common word you'll hear in a company corporate earnings season is uncertainty. So that is, and I know I kind of narrowed in on just one specific aspect of your question, but that's the kind of uncertainty that's associated with the change in administrations in the U.S., if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing things from a globalized perspective, right? And we're talking about organizational resilience, and specifically in the context of aviation. Aviation is not a isolated industry. It has got so much reliance globally, as you already mentioned about that Airbus and Boeing aircraft delivery, reliance on other partners. And okay, fine, we can argue and have a debate about the benefits and the pros and the cons of the globalization and localization. But again, all of those things have had an impact. And that uncertainty that you speak of is absolutely driving the need to be a resilient organization. And this is an area that I really want our students and our learners to try and find out, what other airlines or what other companies are seeing the world from their perspective, and how are they making themselves resilient, and how are they planning for the times ahead. It can't be that as you rightly said, airlines are actually operating profit margins anything between 4% to 9% to 10%, versus another industry we're talking about in rail, 42% and above. So that is the level of pressure that the airline industry, in the globalized context, is facing, isn't it? So what do they do now when it comes to airlines? You've already got on these slides airlines that have reported so far: Delta, United, American, Southwest, Alaska, Korean. They've all got uncertainty built in for the next kind of few quarters. Would you agree?
Very, very much so. So that is definitely a theme, is the uncertainty. And so I'll give you a couple of other, ideas on how these airlines are thinking in these uncertain times. I did mention, that as you just said, Delta, American, Southwest, et cetera. I've since I put this slide together last week, we've got a couple of more additions here. So Lufthansa just reported this morning. I haven't looked at their numbers yet, so I don't know if they're how they are. I haven't listened to their call yet. It may be even going on right now as we speak. But I will certainly listen to that tonight when the transcript comes out. And then JetBlue as well, which is a U.S. low-cost carrier. I saw their numbers. Their headline numbers. They did horribly. It was a very, very rough quarter. But they've had some problems that are specific. They're very JetBlue company specific, not necessarily related to some of the uncertainty we're talking about here. But they the general consensus here that we've heard so far, and it'll be very interesting to hear what Lufthansa says today, and then Air France is going to be going later this week. Then we'll start getting some of the Asian carriers and other areas around the world. But the general consensus from the U.S. guys that have gone so far is that it's almost, so far so good, but we're bracing for the worst. We've got our seatbelts on, we've got, turbulence ahead, but so far we're running pretty smooth. They say that the premium and intercontinental demand, I mentioned that was strong. They say it's still, holding pretty strong. They do say that there is definitely like kind of when these tariffs were announced, starting I'd say in March, the airlines, maybe mid-February, the airlines started seeing weakness in the U.S. domestic market, particularly among price-sensitive flyers. Now, how serious a concern is that? Well, if you tell me that, kind of your lower margin, lower yield traffic is going to be down quite a bit, but also that oil prices are going to be down a lot, I'd probably take that trade. So I think they're okay with it. Like I think and you can also, the other thing you can do, which they are doing, is you can cut capacity. So you don't have as much, excess supply. You don't have to discount
Yeah.
as much. So I think airlines they're okay more or less with that weakness in the U.S. domestic market. Even Southwest, which is like almost 100% domestic. We'll see maybe some of the really low, like the ultra low cost carriers like Frontier, Spirit, maybe they're having a bigger problem with this weakness. I suspect they might be. We'll
Yeah.
find out pretty soon. JetBlue might be as well. I'll be finding that out in a couple of hours when when I listen to their call. But yeah, I think for the most U.S. airlines, so far so good. But as I mentioned, I can't stress this enough: the uncertainty, businesses, consumers. So a lot of businesses are holding back on projects because, well, we don't know if what the situation is going to be. Let's not build this new this new real estate project because we don't know what the cost of materials is going to be, because some of that stuff gets imported from Mexico or Asia or this or that. And, the auto companies are suddenly have to pay these like extremely high tariffs, and their supply chains are all messed up now. Consumers are worried about upcoming shortages, upcoming, price hikes. Now, interestingly enough, one thing that could be happening, and nobody's really said this, but it's just something that, kind of thinking about, is that, consumers right now, and this is something you can see in the data, are going out and they're buying a whole lot of cars and, furniture, like big items, because they know the price is going to go up. So if you look at like auto sales, they jumped in April. And that, interestingly, it could be a situation where consumers are spending money on cars. Like, oh, we were going to buy a car next year. We were going to take a vacation to Paris this year.
Yeah.
But you know what? We better buy the car now. We'll put the Paris vacation off. There could be some of that. So watch for that.
And do you think as a result of that, there will be a lot of economic figures that might be skewed, that people will be comparing it from last year and thinking, well, look at this, based on last year's performance, we're doing fantastically well. And
Yes.
some of the policymaker might be thinking, oh, does this mean that our trade policies are actually working?
You could have people being misled into false conclusions if that's what's your. But I think you're right. You are going to see a spike, and we already are seeing a spike in certain consumer spending figures. And I think we're also maybe even some of the airlines are benefiting from some of that extra spending, is pumping money into the economy. That is very much at risk, though. And I'll give you, so I saw recently that orders for shipping, container shipping, which is, very typical like pattern, is that, a lot of manufactured goods are built China, Vietnam, maybe some other parts of Asia. They're loaded onto container ships. They cross the Pacific into the port of Los Angeles. Then they put them on a train, goes up to Chicago typically. From there, they'll get put on a truck to an Amazon warehouse. From there, they'll get delivered to your home. That's like a very typical pattern. So I can tell you that the shipping orders from the Chinese, Asian factories are down something like 60 to 70%.
Wow.
Now, I'm told that it takes about 2 weeks between the time of a shipping order and when it actually gets loaded onto a container. And then it takes another 3 weeks to get from, let's say, Shanghai to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing the shortages yet.
So it's just downstream.
June, July, August, maybe the fall. Companies like Walmart, they still have, or manufacturers, they still have inventory, so it won't be like immediate. but I'm hearing that we could be hit with a lot of product shortages, almost like during COVID, in a couple of weeks, maybe months,
Well, that's
unless
interesting,
the
Jay.
tariff changes.
Yeah.
Tariff policies, they can change tomorrow, and then everything I said is completely
Well,
no
this is
longer
it.
valid. So,
I think what you're describing is quite an important consideration when it comes to aviation. If people do not have disposable income, or if they prioritize other day-to-day activities over, traveling and visiting friends and family or business or whatever that might be, that can have a ripple effect on the aviation industry. Yes, you're talking about from an America point of view. Same uncertainty is in Europe and Middle East and Southeast Asia, everywhere. There are geopolitical aspects, there's environment aspect, there's a conflict zones, then there's a labor strikes, all of that actually can have a direct impact on that 10% operating margin.
yeah, absolutely. And again, let's not forget. I know I just, I sound like a broken record, just pounding and pounding this. But let's not forget that fuel prices are
Yes.
also, because they're falling. That's going to help the margin. So you've got two things pulling at each other in opposite directions. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and forgive me, by the way, for I am speaking a little bit more about the U.S. here for a couple of reasons. One is that the U.S. airlines are the ones that have reported.
Yeah.
Also, the big, a lot of the big companies in the U.S. have started reporting, and just being that's my
It
area
just,
of
yeah, I think
knowledge.
that's
But,
a really
mhm,
important point for our audience listening and watching this recording at a later stage is to try and compare and contrast from the airlines in their region, and see, what the benefits or concerns have been raised in, say, an American region. Do they
mhm,
apply in Europe? Do they apply in Middle East, Africa, Southeast
right.
Asia, or South America? And if not, why not? That level of critical thinking is key, as you rightly said, Jay.
Yeah, and it's obviously, the airlines being global. I mean, I know, for example, British Airways very dependent on the U.S. market. Some of the other, Air France to a lesser extent, but still important. If you think about the Canadian airlines, the Mexican, I mean, all these, even a lot of the big East Asian airlines. Korean Air is a good example. I told you they reported their earnings. Very big exposure to the United States. So what happens here doesn't stay here, as they say. The
Yeah, yeah,
Oscar
absolutely.
commercial. Yeah. So it is all of this has global relevance, and obviously, what the U.S. is doing because its economy is so large. Uh, if and again, I mean, if you ask me, I mean, who the heck knows? But if you ask me, I do think that these tariffs change. I mean, I think they get lowered
They're likely to,
significantly. They
right?
come
Yeah.
up. I mean, people are just going to get so badly hurt by this. I mean, they already are. So you have to believe that. And I'm open to hearing alternative arguments, but I just kind of think. And every now and then, you're reading the newspaper yesterday. I was hearing the Treasury Secretary say, "Oh yeah, maybe we'll pull back a little bit or thing." So I do think that it's subject to change. But as things stand right now, with tariffs where they are right now, it's hard to imagine anything but the whole global economy just blowing up. I mean,
I mean,
it's
I
really,
love the
it's
fact.
really
I love the
that's
fact, Jay,
serious.
that yeah, I really love the fact that you're talking about trade tariffs and all the rest of it, because I think that is so important for our audience to take note of. Because if you just kick the can down the road to say, well, actually, do you know what? We're not going to remove it, but we're going to delay it and we're going to review it in another 90 days. That's even worse because now you've actually told people it might or it might not happen, or it might not happen in 90 days. So, that doesn't help. But equally, we also need to look at in practical terms, moving away from the economic side of things. What happened in Portugal and in Spain yesterday with the shutdown. This level of resilience within the system is quite an important aspect of it. Do you have any view on well, are you hearing in your networks what really happened and the impact on aviation?
Well, let me first say that my colleague Gordon, who I mentioned at the outset, lives in Lisbon.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was unable to do the podcast with me yesterday to record it because he had no power. So I had
Interesting.
a real impact on us. But yeah, I think what you're getting at, Naveed, is that there's their airlines are always subject to all sorts of different kinds of shocks. One of them
Absolutely.
being just even simple things like, do we have enough power to keep our lights on at the airport? So, yeah, I mean, that's something that, dealing with crises is a very big aspect of running an airline.
Mm.
I always say, like, anytime anything goes wrong in the world, if there's a war, if there's a pandemic, if there's a volcano, if there's an earthquake, if there's a blackout, energy failure, airlines are like always on the front lines.
British
Uh,
Airways and Heathrow, that was another event.
that's exactly, and
Mm.
it's as someone who knows nothing about providing power to a whole country. It seems to me like, oh wow, how could this happen? How could they not have backups, things like that? But who knows? Now I don't know if it has anything to. I haven't read about the cause of this thing
Of
in
course.
Spain. Or I don't know what the cause is. But I just raised the point that cybersecurity is becoming a big issue.
Yeah.
For airlines. I always, JP Morgan is the largest bank in the United States, and their CEO, they call him the king of Wall Street. His name is Jamie Dimon. They always ask him, what keeps you up at night? What's your biggest fear? And he says,
Yeah.
more than anything else, like a cyber attack, like a huge
Yeah.
cyber, major thing that takes down banks or thing. So, all these things they're things airline has to think about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's to your question. This
Yeah.
power failure thing in the Iberian Peninsula is just another, example of
Absolutely.
that,
Yeah.
of something going wrong.
I'm just conscious of the time, but there were a couple of other things that came to my mind. I just wanted to very quickly go over those. Is that you mentioned about supply chain in the context of OEM, and you mentioned Airbus and Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
And against the geopolitical context and trade tariffs and wars and all the rest of it, you almost need to then start thinking about other manufacturers. You've got Comac from China, for example. They return one of the 737 Maxes back to Boeing. And then there's a consequence of, protectionism. So do you think that that duopoly of Airbus and Boeing, especially when they're not able to keep up with the demand, could be met by severe challenge, or do you think that's too far-fetched from Comac?
Yeah, so the Comac situation is an interesting one. I heard someone once say that the two most complicated things that human beings manufacture in the world today, one is advanced semiconductors,
Yeah,
and two is wide body airplanes. and,
it's true. It's
and so,
everywhere else. Supply chain
yeah,
all
it
over the
just
world.
yeah, they're global. They're just extremely complex. And my point being that it is not easy to compete with Boeing and Airbus. Just,
Yeah,
it takes maybe decades of development. And it's not even only just the technology, but it's establishing, the maintenance facilities around the world, the support functions, the marketing,
yeah.
I mean, it's just a huge endeavor. So,
Excellent
I
points.
think with Comac, we're not even anywhere near the point where they'd be
Mm.
able to compete with Boeing. And just a few things to consider with them. I mean, one is mostly, first of all, like the C919, which is, roughly equivalent to the 737 A320,
Yeah,
about the same size. That plane is, the economics of that plane are significantly inferior to like the Max,
yeah,
a Max 8 or an A321 Neo. Don't think of them as really competing in terms of economics. They're not. It's a couple generations behind, maybe. I mean, someone who's an expert in that would know more, but they're definitely they're definitely significantly behind. So there's that. Now, most of that plane, I mean, some of the critical parts of that plane come from Pratt and Whitney in the U.S. and Honeywell in the U.S.
yeah.
and European manufacturers. So that is still very much like a Western heavy aircraft.
Mm.
So if the U.S. and Europe and the rest of the world, if there's a break with China in terms of trade, that plane is very vulnerable.
Mm.
So there's that. I think Comac, the one thing that they do have is, a very large domestic market that they can sell
Yes.
to, which they already, have been selling. China has really shown extraordinary capability in innovating in the electric car, electric vehicle space,
Yes,
in
BYD for
the,
the.
alternative energy space, in other areas of very important technologies. So I don't have any doubt that over time they can, develop their own excellent engines, their own excellent airframes, and avionics and all that. But these things don't take months, they don't take years, they take decades.
Decades,
So
yeah.
it's still, we're still a long way before Emirates is going to buy a plane from China, or
Yeah.
Japan Airlines is going to buy, so it's we're not even close right now. We're really kind of stuck with a Boeing Airbus
Yeah.
duopoly, and I think that's the word the airlines would use, is stuck. I mean, they don't like it.
Yeah.
They prefer more choice, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I'll say one other interesting thing about Boeing that I think maybe gets overlooked sometime is that Boeing right now has no problem. This is true for Airbus too. They have no problem getting new airplane orders. There's no demand problem there. Their problem is entirely with production, particularly on the Boeing side. So they have no problem selling the aircraft. They have a problem building the aircraft. So with respect to China and some of these tensions where China has refused to take Boeing airplanes, frankly, in the short term, the near term, Boeing doesn't really, it's not a big deal.
They can just sell
Boeing,
it to anyone else.
hi,
Ryanair.
my name is Air India. I've been waiting online for 5 years for my plane. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is United Airlines. There's people lined up for these planes. So
Yeah.
that's not an issue. Now, of course, longer term, China is such a huge market. Boeing is going to want to be able to compete there, but just something to keep in mind.
The point I would slightly tweak a little bit more is around regulations. 777X, 737, dash 10, I think it is, all going through that regulatory approval and the delay for that. And some of those long-standing customers of Boeing are waiting for those approvals so that they can say, in 8 years' time, I'd like to order 200 of them. Not that many, but you got the picture.
Sometimes, yeah.
So, so do you think that the regulatory aspect is also complicating the Boeing and Airbus kind of supply chain in terms of their ability to produce more? Because there was some restriction as far as their average monthly output was concerned. That was reduced so that they can focus on the quality control of it.
Yes, that's a great point. I neglected to mention that one earlier when I was talking about the aircraft supply constraints, but that very much is one. The regulatory kind of constraints that have been put on Boeing. And like you correctly said, Boeing's new 777 plane, the 77X they call it, has not been certified by the FAA yet, and nor have two models of the 737 MAX. So you have the Dash 7 MAX, which is the smallest version. And there's really only one airline in the world that cares about that. That's Southwest. They're really the only airline that ordered it. A couple others, maybe, I don't know, it's Allegiant or WestJet, but it's really
Elliott
just,
management might have something else to say about that, right?
well, you raise a point. I think they, we have to wonder about whether they really need that plane. But anyway, that's a separate issue. They well, they'll stick to arguing about bag fees for now. But that's a very Southwest specific airplane. But then the MAX 10, that's a plane that Ryanair is very eager to get. It's a plane that United is very eager to get. It's a plane that Delta is very eager. So very, very popular plane, not yet certified. So absolutely, what you said is true, that that lack of certification has contributed to the aircraft supply shortage.
Great. Well, I think we are nearing the finishing it. I know you had a couple of more slides that you wanted to go through, so feel free to pick any key points from those.
Yeah, but what I'll say is here, with just a few minutes left, I mentioned this here. So what I did is I put, and you can just read this on your own and then contact me if you have any, if there's anything you want to explore here. I guess we can kind of race through them at super speed if you'd like, but I just picked out, kind of one big theme from each region. So at Airline Weekly, we kind of break the world up into actually 10 regions. I consolidated some of them here. So what do I have, like 6 or 7, just for, just to be simpler. But there are 10 regions. one example is like East Asia. We break that up into Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. But
Mm.
anyway, so here are these that I just listed. I kind of mentioned North America, how some of these low cost carriers have been in distress for reasons related to rising costs, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, a little bit of a play on Jay-Z's hit song there, 99 problems, but a beach ain't one there. What I'm referring to is that European airlines have all sorts of headaches. The economy is not growing and hasn't grown for decades now very much. I mean, there's been some growth. They have, it's a very, very high aviation tax environment.
Mm.
There have been a lot of labor strikes. Airport costs are often high. Corporate demand has been struggling. However, if you look a lot of the leading European airlines, many of them are doing rather well, and a big reason why is the beach. There's leisure traffic is still held up very well, and that's partially if you talk to talk like consumer surveys in Britain, for example, and they'll ask people like, are you gonna give up your vacation this year because the economy maybe not be doing so great, or the job market's not so great? And it's the general takeaway is that people will give up food and water before they give up their their summer trip to Greece. So
I think
that
there's a particular reason for that, Jay, because we've
yeah
got these holiday tour operators like TUI in the
yeah
UK, Jet2, even Ryanair and EasyJet. They're making it still accessible for
yeah
people to go on a reasonable holiday away. And you're absolutely right with the target destination being in Spain and Italy and in Greece.
mhm,
And even in Turkey,
yeah.
people are able to then commute and actually forget about all the other challenges that you talked about. As you rightly said, 99 problems, but the beach ain't one. I
Sorry
love
for
that.
the slight borderline vulgarity there, but I just thought I thought that was made the point. So Mideast and Turkey, fascinating region for
Mm.
aviation because there have been so many like superstar airlines that have come out of there, specifically Emirates and Qatar Airways, and Turkish Airlines has been pretty incredible of what they've been able to accomplish. Also, a lot of low cost carriers in the region, very, very interesting business models. I like to call some of those like the Emirates and Turkish Airlines, I like to call them the everywhere to everywhere airlines. They can really connect pretty much any 2 points on the globe. And they can do that because of their very, very favorable geographies. If you take a place like Dubai or Istanbul, they kind of sit between the path of just like I said, everywhere to
Everywhere.
everywhere. If you want to go to, Chicago to somewhere in Indonesia, or if you want to go from, Argentina to somewhere in Russia, or if you want to go from, somewhere in Ireland to somewhere in South Africa, like they'll be able to do it in a convenient way. So
Mm.
that is, very interesting. And they've been, doing rather well in the past, sort of in the post-COVID environment, because as I mentioned earlier, that sort of long haul premium traffic has done well. Long haul in general has done very well. So
Mm.
they've been, posting, they've been performing rather, or they've been rather successfully. Latin America, it's funny, like pretty much there's not that many big airlines left in Latin America. You've got Aeromexico in Mexico. You've got Copa in Panama. You've got three big ones in Brazil, LATAM, which is kind of everywhere in South
Yeah.
America. You've got Azul, you've got a Gol, and you've got Avianca up in, based in Colombia. Like pretty much all of those, every one of those airlines I mentioned, except for Copa and except for Azul, I think I got that right. Did I miss any? All of them filed for bankruptcy.
Yes.
And it's not because they were bad airlines or because they were, it's mostly because while the rest of the world supported their airline industries during the COVID crisis, most Latin American governments didn't. So they
Didn't.
really had
Yes.
no choice but to restructure.
Great point.
Yeah. However,
Mm.
that's actually benefited them now. I mean, it wasn't fun going through that and people got hurt, people lost money, but now they're in a situation where like almost all of those airlines I mentioned are doing rather well.
Mm.
Um, they're very, very strong. And, even I mentioned before how the airline industry has faced a lot of non-fuel cost inflation in the past 5 years. For those guys, that hasn't always been the case because during bankruptcy, they cut their labor costs, they cut their
Yeah.
aircraft costs. So a little bit of a different situation there. And, if you take an airline like LATAM or Copa, they're doing fantastically well. They're really, really strong right now. In East Asia, a lot of things going on with China. China's economy, China's airline industry has changed a lot since COVID. The domestic market is still healthy, but the really international market is still very tough, particularly long haul international. I mean, it's amazing to me that there's barely any nonstop capacity that even exists between China and North America anymore than the U.S. So a lot of changes, and that's affected sometimes in some cases like the tourism of big countries like Thailand, which have big tourism industries. So that's a little bit about, East Asia is obviously a big region. We could talk about it forever, and I apologize for kind of racing through this, but I know we're kind of running out of time here. Indian subcontinent, big theme there is that Air India, Indigo, a couple of smaller airlines are ordering airplanes like mad. I believe the largest Boeing and Airbus customer right now in the world by units is Indigo, which is an Indian airline. They absolutely dominate the domestic scene in India. They're the largest airline by far and away. And now they're creeping into intercontinental markets. They ordered A350s. I think it's the 330s.
I think it's A330. You're right.
They're 330s. Yeah. So they
and also in the business segment as well, which is quite interesting.
And they're adding business class. They're adding loyalty programs. So they are really 30 firm A350-900s. I apologize. I just my old mind. That's just see. I mentioned my old age at the beginning. That's where just showed its face there. So, but A350s, and then finally in Africa, if anybody's interested, check out Airline Weekly. I wrote an article, a profile of Ethiopian Airlines this week. It's kind of interesting. They're super interesting airline in a way. They're a little bit like the Emirates Turkish model I mentioned. They're kind of everywhere. They have a hub in their capital, Addis Ababa, which also has pretty good geography. They've done some interesting things. So they are an example of a very successful sub-Saharan African airline. I'm talking mostly about sub-Saharan Africa here. A little bit of a different story with Egypt, and those markets kind of behave a little differently. But Ethiopians' success notwithstanding, most of sub-Saharan Africa is dominated by foreign carriers like Emirates, like Turkish, like Air France KLM. So it is a very difficult environment to navigate if you're a homegrown African airline. I listed a couple other hot topics. I won't go through them. They're just there for you to think about. They're there for you to, you're, like I said, you're welcome to contact me if you ever want to chat about any of these. Maybe some of you are, writing papers. Navi, do they have to write any kind of like term papers or anything?
Yes. So thank you so much, Jay. I think that really is a really good segue in highlighting why is it that we're inviting industry experts like yourself. Fascinating discussion, so much of depth. There are so many aspects. There are so many points that we could have actually talked about for hours at an end. But I think those little points that the list that Jay mentioned can be a really good thought process for your research paper. The two cohorts that are likely to be watching this recording are focusing on the globalized nature of the aviation industry and also organizational resilience. So you do have your assessments, you do have your courseworks that will encourage you to look at things in a very critical way so that you can understand the nuanced approach in different regions, different geopolitical context, different aspects for different regions. Why is it one airline thrives? Ethiopian Airlines in Africa is an exception. Why is that? Trying to understand the consolidation when the United American and Delta versus IAG or Lufthansa, Etihad and Emirates. Why is it that they are thriving in some regions and maybe not so in the others? So this is an important aspect for you to start thinking about your research area, whether that's on sustainability, whether that's on advanced air mobility, cybersecurity, whatever that might be. You really now need to look at from a holistic point of view and dig deeper into some of the points that Jay so eloquently raised. And please feel free to get in touch with me or with Jay. Jay has got his contact detail on screen. And I can't thank you, enough, Jay, for giving me the opportunity, for giving us the opportunity and your time and your expertise. This has been really, really appreciated.
Thank you, Naveed. Yeah, it was fun for me, and good luck to all of you students who are watching this. And if I could be of any help, please reach out. And yeah, can you all see my contact information?
Yes, we can. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can follow me on LinkedIn too, because I occasionally post some
Brilliant. Highly
airline
recommended.
information. Yep.
Let me stop the recording now.